It's Monday, August 11th, 2025, a historic meeting set to go down later this week in Alaska. We might be on the Sicario timeline and all of Christ for all of life. What did our Secretary of Defense mean by that? We'll tell you that and more next on the AM Update. President Trump made a huge announcement on Friday, saying in a post on Truth Social, quote, "The highly anticipated meeting between myself as President of the United States and President Vladimir Putin of Russia will take place next Friday, August 15th, in the great state of Alaska. Further details to follow. Thank you for your attention on this matter." President Trump and Vladimir Putin meeting in Alaska. Tell yourself 2 years ago that we would be on this timeline where the Russian president and the American president meeting in Alaska. Details on where they're actually planning to meet up. Still, mum is the word. Vice President JD Vance told Fox News on Sunday morning, this thing could be a game changer as far as ending the conflict in Ukraine.
I've got to give the president a huge amount of credit here, Maria, because this is a major breakthrough for American diplomacy. If you go back, this war's been going on for over 3 years at this point, well over 1 million Russians and Ukrainian dead soldiers. And as the president says, the numbers are probably much higher than the official tally indicates. There has been no substantial breakthrough. And for 6 months, the president himself, he's asked me, he's asked Secretary Rubio, of course, Steve Witkoff, we have been aggressively working, trying to break the logjam. One of the most important logjams is that Vladimir Putin said that he would never sit down with Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, and the president has now got that to change. We're at a point now where we're now trying to figure out, frankly, scheduling and things like that around when these three leaders could sit down and discuss an end to this conflict. Now, what do I think is ultimately going to come out of this? Look, it's actually very simple. If you take where the current line of contact between Russia and Ukraine is, we're going to try to find some negotiated settlement that the Ukrainians and the Russians can live with, where they can live in relative peace, where the killing stops. It's not going to make anybody super happy. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians probably at the end of the day are going to be unhappy with it. But I don't think you can actually sit down and have this negotiation absent the leadership of Donald J. Trump.
Okay, whatever it takes to stop talking about Ukraine. Stop. But still, nevertheless, it is a historic meeting going down in Alaska later this month. Well, President Trump has secretly authorized military... Well, it's not so secret if the press is writing about it. But secretly authorized military forces against Latin America drug cartels designated by the United States as foreign terrorist organizations. The move, first reported by the New York Times, would give U.S. forces permission to engage the cartels, which traffic drugs like fentanyl across the U.S.-Mexico border. The New York Post reporting, a White House source said, quote, "The president has determined not just to dismantle but completely destroy Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro's Cartel de las Solas and obliterate their operations in the Western Hemisphere. The anti-cartel effort is being coordinated among several departments, including the Department of Defense, Justice Department, Department of Homeland Security, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the Treasury." Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum on Friday said the U.S. military would not be entering Mexican territory following reports that Washington could take action to combat the cartels. Trump has previously discussed using military force against drug cartels in an effort to stop the flow of drugs and illegal immigrants across the southern border. So if you're familiar with the movies Sicario and Sicario 2, that's very much the plot of those movies. That kind of peripheral forces of the U.S. military took direct military action against some of these cartels. So that could be going down sooner rather than later. Of course, it's not really a secret if it's being printed in the press, but there it is nonetheless. We talked about this on Friday, various reports that Israel is preparing for a ground invasion of Gaza. Here is Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu.
Our goal is not to occupy Gaza. Our goal is to free Gaza, free it from Hamas terrorists. The war can end tomorrow if Gaza, or rather if Hamas lays down its arms and releases all the remaining hostages. Gaza will be demilitarized. Israel will have overriding security responsibility. A security zone will be established on Gaza's border with Israel to prevent future terrorist incursions. A civilian administration will be established in Gaza that will seek to live in peace with Israel. That's our plan for the day after Hamas, and let me summarize it. 5 principles for concluding the war. 1, Hamas disarmed. 2nd, all hostages freed. Third, Gaza demilitarized. Fourth, Israel has overriding security control. And five, non-Israeli peaceful civilian administration. By that I mean a civilian administration that doesn't educate its children for terror, doesn't pay terrorists, and doesn't launch terrorist attacks against Israel.
So that is the sticking point, of course, that fifth point, a non-Israeli peaceful civilian administration. We talked about that in passing on Friday, saying, I don't know who that's going to be. It's going to be one of their Arab neighbors, maybe Saudi Arabia. Maybe they'd be kicking and dragging their feet to the table. Well, I saw this on Friday as well. This is on I-24. That's an Israeli news channel. This is a Saudi Arabian analyst, political and geopolitical analyst, talking about just what that civilian administration would look like. He says, quote, Saudi Arabia has no problem, he says, establishing relations with the state of Israel. Israel is a neighboring state, and no one can erase it. Hamas is a terrorist organization that has occupied the Gaza Strip. So that is a Saudi Arabian geopolitical analyst saying, hey, from my vantage point, we have no problem whatsoever establishing ties with Israel. And it's kind of a wink and a nod to that civilian administration of Gaza. So Israel seems to be going forward with their, don't call it an occupation of Gaza. Back at home, New York Attorney General Letitia James was hit with a pair of subpoenas as part of a grand jury probe scrutinizing a $454 million civil fraud case against President Trump. Acting Albany U.S. Attorney John Sarcone convened the grand jury to address potential deprivation of rights allegations after launching an investigation of James in coordination with the FBI this past May. One of the subpoenas related to the civil fraud judgment won by the Empire State's Attorney General's office against Trump, which is still under review by the First Department Appellate Division. A second subpoena reportedly sought information on James's own investigation of the National Rifle Association. Separately, a grand jury in Virginia is examining whether to hang up or hand up an indictment against James for allegedly falsifying records to receive favorable loan terms on a home she purchased in Norfolk in 2023. The Albany subpoenas were the first reported by Fox News. Good. This is somebody, Attorney General Letitia James of New York, who openly ran on lawfare against President Trump. I have to think there's some criminal wrongdoing, even if they get her on the equivalent of tax evasion with some of those falsifying of records for favorable mortgage terms. They're going to get her on something, and she deserves it. I can't think of anybody who deserves it more, because Steve Bannon, not a huge Bannon fan myself, but I said this at the time. I made a big deal of it at the time. He said just a few months ago, probably one of the biggest threats is not necessarily the swamp, it's the New York State Attorney General's office, and I think he is right about that. In the state of Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton has filed with the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, to declare 13 Democrat House seats vacant. He said in a statement, quote, these rogue Democrat legislators who fled the state have abandoned their duties, leaving their seats vacant. These cowards deliberately sabotaged the constitutional process and violated the oath they were sworn to uphold. I have asked the Texas Supreme Court to declare what has been clear from the beginning, that these runaway members have officially vacated their offices in the Texas House. So who knows where that will go? This has been dragging on long enough. There were threats, words, strongly worded statements. Got to come back by Friday afternoon. To my knowledge, I don't think a quorum, at least a quorum's worth of Democrats have actually come back to finish out their special legislative session. Checking in once more on Nancy Pelosi, who said over the weekend, because of President Trump's protections for young children, protecting them from meatball surgery and chemical castration in the name of gender, she says she wants to make that meatball surgery legal nationwide, and that's what she's going to be pushing for.
How is your office responding to the pauses in gender-affirming care here in California?
Well, that is something that I'm working for at the national level, and we have, how can I say, are hoping that we can have gender-affirming care for our trans kids, and that it's a sad thing for us. I'm not totally. I don't know what effect we can have nationally with what we have going on in the White House and in the Congress. It's really very sad. If you were there, outside our door, we have a trans flag.
That is the heart of the boomer lib. Yeah, we're standing up for the little guy. We got to help these trans kids by getting them irreversible surgery and chemical castration. And by the way, we have a trans flag outside of our door. That is the beating heart of the boomer lib, don't you think? Coming up next, after the break, a man who just pulverized a 73-year-old pro-life witness gets a slap on the wrist. Also, why did our Secretary of Defense say all of Christ for all of life over the weekend? He posted that on social media. We'll tell you that and more next.
What's up, everyone? Here is my 4-month product review of this baby. Okay, so delivery takes a while, 9+ months, but the product so far has absolutely exceeded expectations. Super lightweight, surprisingly durable, and that new baby smell is just chef's kiss.
That is a viral TikTok that I saw over the weekend of a new dad giving his 4-month-old like a product review, like he was reviewing something he purchased on Amazon. I got a kick out of that, but it's very pro-life themed, very normalizing, I guess I should say, of having babies and just being a dad. And it's really, really funny. The rest of that video plays out for another minute or so. You see examples of things like that are just pro-life coded that go viral. It's really cool to see. And hopefully it's an indication of a culture that's changing. Well, one thing that needs to change is slaps on the wrist for violent criminals. A 28-year-old man who was caught on video attacking 2 pro-life activists outside a Planned Parenthood clinic in Baltimore was sentenced last week to a year of home detention and 3 years of probation. Baltimore Circuit Judge Yvette M. Bryant rebuffed prosecutors' calls for a 10-year sentence against Patrick Bryce, the 28-year-old, after he was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree assault and reckless endangerment in relation to the May of 2023 incident. One of the victims in the attack, Mark Crosby, who was 73 years old at the time, reportedly shouted at Bryant on Thursday as she left the bench. Quote, "What about my rights and my well-being?" 73 years old, just attacked brutally by Bryce, the 28-year-old, who said back in May of 2023 he just intended to debate Richard Schaefer, the other victim, an 84-year-old, about the concept of sin outside the Planned Parenthood baby-killing facility, but then lost his mind after Schaefer made what he perceived to be a racial remark. Of course, that's always the pat response. That's according to the Baltimore Banner, who reported that. Surveillance video showed Bryce shoving Schaefer into a flower pot and then assaulting Crosby when he rushed to his aid. He said, quote, "I just snapped." And now he's just getting a slap on the wrist. That sounds like demonic possession to me, if anything. And I wanted to have a debate with these 2 pro-life dudes outside of this Baltimore Planned Parenthood baby-killing facility. But then, just as one does, I just, shoved an 84-year-old into a flower pot and then beat the you-know-what out of a septuagenarian. That's just how things go. That's just how things normally go. Oh, and I think they said something racial. Yeah. A year of home confinement. That's it. Slap on the wrist. Now for something a little bit more refreshing. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth posted the following on social media over the weekend, quote, "All of Christ for all of life." He posted with it a video, a 7-minute segment from CNN featuring one Douglas Wilson of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho, and Christian nationalism. That was the topic of focus for the segment on CNN. Here's just a little excerpt.
Christ Church senior pastor Doug Wilson makes no apologies for his beliefs on God and country.
I'd like to see the town be a Christian town. I'd like to see the state be a Christian state. I'd like to see the nation be a Christian nation. I'd like to see the world be a Christian world.
And now Wilson's controversial views as a Christian nationalist are gaining sway in the nation's center of power with the recent opening of his new church and high-profile parishioners like Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Is planting a church in D.C. part of your mission to try to turn this into a Christian nation?
Yes. So every society is theocratic. The only question is who's theo. In a secular democracy, it would be demos, the people. In a Christian republic, it'd be Christ.
Well, what would you say to someone watching this to say, look, I'm a Muslim. Who are you to say your worldview is better than mine, that your God is better than mine?
Well, if I went to Saudi Arabia, I would fully expect to live under their God's rules.
But you said earlier that you want this to be a Christian world.
Yes.
So you want to supplant their religion with your Christian?
Yes, by peaceful means, by sharing the gospel. There's a lot of work yet to do. I believe that we are working our little corner of the vineyard.
Wilson's Little Corner, a picturesque campus nestled on the outskirts of downtown Moscow, Idaho, is growing by the day with thousands of like-minded Christians. Parishioners of his church, known as Kirkers, own and operate several businesses downtown next to liberal college town stores.
If it's true,
Why did he yell boo? Because of me. Because of you.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
That is the best part of that interview. It goes on for another 5 minutes or so, where Pastor Doug Wilson of Moscow, Idaho, Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho, just espouses some small O Orthodox views about issues that, like, women should submit to their husbands, things like that. That's just small O Orthodox Christianity. And this interviewer on CNN is just completely aghast at some of those statements. And if Christian nationalism just means basically we want Christ's truth and the way that he wants us to live our lives, if that just means spreading that and hoping that that comes to fruition, then I guess everyone who actually believes the rightly divided teachings of the good book is a Christian nationalist. I'm less split on the term Christian nationalist than I was 2 years ago. Like 2 years ago, I would have said, let's just embrace that term. Well, now it's being used as a pejorative for basically anybody who believes, as I said, for the 15th time already this morning, small O Orthodox Christian teaching. What do I mean by small O Orthodox Christian teaching? The way that we have understood scriptures, at least in the Christian church, up until about 15 minutes ago, when it was subverted by leftist Marxist forces. That's basically what I mean. So tell yourself 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you knew who Doug Wilson was back then, when he was just a plucky preacher with a blog called Blog and Mayblog, that he would be getting a national cable television special about something called Christian nationalism. And one of his denomination's foremost parishioners is the Secretary of Defense. I would have to pinch myself because I don't think I'd believe myself there. And finally, I want to leave you with this. On a Monday morning, the world and our country said goodbye to a beloved astronaut on Friday, Jim Lovell, commander of Apollo 13, portrayed by Tom Hanks in the movie of the same name. 4-time spaceflight veteran was Jim Lovell. His work inspired millions. Courage under pressure, as depicted in that aforementioned movie, helped forge the United States' path to the moon and beyond. Of course, you'll recall he and the crew of Apollo 8 read Genesis 1 on Christmas Eve in 1968 during a live televised broadcast.
And for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning was the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Let it divide the waters from the waters."
That is Christmas Eve, 1968. Astronauts Jim Lovell and the crew of Apollo 8 reading Genesis 1 during a live televised broadcast. I was just watching a speech that Jim Lovell gave a few years ago, talking about the first time he went up into space and was far enough away from planet Earth that he could hold out his finger and block out the entire planet with just his thumb. And he talked about how it crystallized for him in that moment what I think is one of the best explanations or examples of general revelation that our Creator has given us. What is general revelation? Special revelation is scriptures, basically. General revelation is revelation that everyone has access to, that you can look around and you can see that God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, and there is fingerprints of God's handiwork all around us through creation. And Jim Lovell said the first time that he went up high enough or far enough away into space that he could block out the entire planet that he is from just with his thumb. He said it crystallized something for him about general revelation. That we grew up on this planet, this speck in the universe that just so happens to have a perfect atmosphere, that just so happens to have a perfectly balanced atmosphere, that just so happens to have a magnetic field to protect it from radiation from deep space. That just so happens to be just far enough away, not too far, not too close, away from the star in which it orbits, that it doesn't burn up and it doesn't go cold. And he said in that moment, looking back at Earth, that he could just block out with his thumb. That just very obvious truth, that the obvious fingerprints of an intelligent creator, singular creator, that became crystallized for him. Not too many people can share that sort of perspective. Not too many people have been far enough away from our planet where something like that, with the general revelation and just how perfectly intricate and right on time and just in the right place our planet is. Not too many people have that sort of perspective, and Jim Lovell shared that perspective not too long ago. That's going to do it for Monday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntire, and this is the AM Update.